Welcome to The Access. I'm your host, Hayvi Bouzo. For the first part of this episode, we'll be discussing the experiences of detainees held by the Assad regime and the brutal conditions and torture they have endured. To talk about all of this, we are joined by Omar Alshogre, a former Syrian prisoner and survivor of torture. Thank you so much, Omar Alshogre, for joining us from Sweden.
Thank you.
I really wanted to see you when you were in DC, but unfortunately we were not able to meet up at that time. I'm really glad, though, that I'm able to have you on today. I want to ask you, Omar, your story is just astonishing. It's a tragic story, but it's also a story of survival. I know you've been telling your story on and on, but I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your circumstances, specifically in the Sayednaya prison, where we've been hearing a lot of horrifying stories about daily executions. Tell us a little bit more about your experience. You've been detained since you were 16 years old.
Yeah, I've been detained in 7 different times. And the last time was the most important because I stayed in prison for 3 years. At that time, I was 17 years old, and I got out of prison when I was 20. Mm-hmm. So they transferred me from prison to prison. So I ended up in Syednaya in the last year. Mm-hmm. And Syednaya prison was really different from all other prisons because of the level of the torture and the level of starvation.
What's the name of this prison?
Syednaya prison.
Syednaya, yes.
Yeah, and being in branch 215 was so hard. You can't imagine how much torture we get every day, and not only the torture from the guards, but even the torture from the other prisoners who was forced to torture us or not.
Can you repeat your point about the torture that you've suffered, you and your other prison mates at that time in Syednaya?
Yeah, well, let's take it from the beginning because we can't start in Syednaya prison because you miss But the problem with starting with Syednaya prison is that the last level of the experience, the highest level of torture, mm-hmm. We can't start from the end.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about the beginning, Omar.
Okay, yeah. So I was arrested as a minor. The reason was for the first time of arresting demonstration. The last time was no reason. So just put me in prison. They arrested me with 3 cousins. 2 of them died with me in prison. The third one, I heard she died, but she survived actually. When I get out of prison, I met her. So they transferred me into 10 different prisons. The most important prisons was branch 215 and Syednaya. And 215, because we call it like the slow death, something like that in Arabic, or سجن الموت البطيء.
Slow death prison.
Because people just die slowly because starvation, torture, psychological torture, and people miss their families and they don't have any hope about surviving, like getting out of prison. No one think about, we're gonna get out soon, maybe after 1 year or 2. No, people lose that feeling from the first month in prison or 2 months, because the only thing you see is dead bodies everywhere, to the right, to the left, in front of you, behind you, dead bodies everywhere. Even when you go to the toilet, there's bodies. Even in the toilet, there is dead bodies. And you go to the isolation room when you have always have 40, 50 dead bodies. And wherever you go, there's dead bodies. How can you imagine getting out of prison? You can't. You just feel that I'm gonna die, but I don't know when. Then you see the sexual torture, and you see the physical, the psychological torture, and you think, and every time you think it's the worst place on earth. They transfer you to another prison, and when you come to the new prison, it's like higher level of torture, which means you feel that I hope they can just transfer me back to the last prison because it was a paradise. We compare that.
So it gets even like more intense as they transform you to another prison.
Yeah, that they used to do that. So I stayed for 1 year, 9 months in 215. Then they transferred me the last year to Said Naya. But before 215, I was in 291. I was in 400, 248. I was like I was in many prisons.
And when you talk about sexual, assault in those prisons as well, it's against men. Is that something that you witnessed or you actually experienced yourself?
It's something I witnessed. I saw my best friends, the guards used to do that, or to force prisoners to do that with each other because they know how bad effect it could
Yes.
have on people. Because they know since Syria and our culture, that's like something more than terrible. So no one gonna do that. And if you don't do, you're gonna be killed. And not only killed, just killed. You're gonna be tortured for a long time before you die. So people gonna be forced to do that, and after when you do that, you're gonna sit in the corner, cry, and don't want to eat, don't want to drink until you die because of that shame that you feel.
Yes.
Even I don't think people should have shame because of that, because the God should have the shame, but people does have the shame and they die. They want to kill themselves after being in the situations.
And
Then they transfer us to say no prison when you see that almost every day because the guard just like we have like specific guards for every kind of torture. So some of the guards used to kill people with the water. Other guards used to kill people by the food or just having his like feet on their neck or by the sexual torture. We have like
Omar, you were so young when you witnessed all these, just horror, like the horror that you're explaining right now. You were really young when you started witnessing these things. How do you describe the feelings that you felt towards these prisons, towards these prisoners, and towards the regime that is doing that systematically to people who just protested against them? Didn't do anything but protest.
when I was in prison, like as a new prisoner, like I was not understanding what's happening. Like it can't be happening right now because like the God should be a human. The God is like a Syrian guy. They should have some feelings of empathy for us, or I don't know why that's happening. And I could just what I was doing in prison. I was listening to the God when they laugh, when they torture us, to understand how much they hate us and how much they feel good of doing what they're doing because
Did you
like many of the
feel
gods was
the
like
same
laughing
back?
very highly with you
Did
could
you
feel the
hate them too,
happiness.
Omar? Did you feel hate towards these people? What did you feel towards these guards when you heard and saw the level of sadistic, basically evil towards prisoners?
Yeah, well, the God is more than evil. Evil is not enough because evil people can do something bad, but not they can't. I wonder if the gods have nightmares or not. I'm not sure because we could feel the happiness, their happiness when they hit you and they laugh from their heart. Not only the gods, even the prisoners who started to be volunteer with the guards and torture other prisoners. They, in the first weeks, feel bad of doing that. The week after was like very satisfied. And the problem is that the sickness of having power, power is sickness. And everyone trying to get some power, no one care what's gonna happen. And as a prisoner, when you get some power, some food and some water in time of hunger, you say you can do everything because you try to translate that in your brain to say I'm doing what I'm doing to survive. I need to survive. But it's not the fact, because you can survive in different way. And you can't just say I'm doing that to survive and kill other people, because in this case you're a murderer. And unfortunately, it's a lot of prisoners being forced in the beginning to torture other prisoners, but later then they was liking torturing other people, as the guard is, because when when a new guard start working there, the officer come with the guard and like take me out, for example, and say to this the officer say to this guard, new soldier, hit him 100 belts. And this like soldier never did that before, so he just start with like not very sure if that's right or not wrong. And that guard just count like and try to miss some numbers, to say 78 80, to just miss some numbers, I get less bells. But the same guard after 2 weeks hit me 200 instead of 100.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
So it's like there's a damage that's being done on every level to the prisoners, to the victims, and also the guards. These people who are being brought to torture others are becoming that evil that they are trained basically to be okay and eventually enjoy torturing others.
yeah, they do. They enjoy doing what they're doing. And for the guards, for many guards, they don't have anything else to do during the day. Like if they just give you the food in the morning once, it's only once, and you go to the toilet once. So like they're gonna sit down 8 hours without doing anything. So they want to do something. So they come and torture people.
And it becomes
They
their
don't. They're
entertainment.
not allowed to do anything else. Just
Omar,
torturing people. Yep.
you were also involved in basically they made you put numbers on the dead bodies, which are the numbers and on the dead bodies that we've seen in the Caesar's photos. Can you tell me about this part of this, horrifying experience, and also your cousins as being victims of this torture by the Assad regime?
Yeah, the first time I was in the isolation room where we have all the dead bodies was when my first cousin died, and
How did your
I
cousin
had to
die?
carry him. He just died because they broke all the bones in his like breast, and I was like he was really tortured and could not move anymore, and so he just died when he was sitting down, because you get only very limited square, like 40 centimeter square was like this area to sit down. And so if you're a big man, you can't sit down. And he got this space, so he just died while he was sitting down. And someone said to me, Omar, your cousin died. So I was looking at my cousin, and I saw him just sitting down, like now he's still alive. What are you talking about? And this man said like 10 minutes after, Omar, I'm telling you, your cousin died. I said, no, look at him, he's sitting. He said, yes, he died. And I just stand up, try to move my cousin to just say, wake up. And he was dead. And there is nothing to do. You should just carry him to the isolation room. So I carried him and put him in this room. It was my first time I see, like, so I saw dead bodies every day, but not collecting in the same room. So I went to this room, and at that day there was like a lot of massacres happening. So in the room was a lot of dead bodies, and in the corner, to the right corner was arms, and the other corner was legs, and the other was like heads. And like if you want to take a body, you should collect from the four corners to just get a body.
Wow.
And like year after, the other cousin died as well, and he died between my arms, and I was carrying him from the toilet.
Would you want to share, what happened with that cousin's story?
Yeah, well, my cousin Bashir was my best friend before prison and in prison. I was like closer to me than my brothers, so I had a really good relation. We had a motorcycle together, so we used to do a lot. So they arrested us together, and when his first brother died, he felt very, very bad because he was the older brother. And he was thinking, he was thinking like that, if I survive and get out of prison, going to meet my mother, the first question my mother gonna ask me, where is your sister and your brother? Can I tell her that they tortured my sister and they killed my brother? I can't do that because I'm the oldest one. I should protect them.
Oh.
I don't want to survive. I want to die. I don't want to eat. I don't want to drink. So he stopped eating, drinking. And if you don't eat, you die. If you think about your family, you die. If you're trying to be nice, you die. Because you don't have like enough food or enough water or like that you don't have oxygen to breathe.
Yes.
And he's just started.
So he just basically surrendered to death because he didn't want to face the consequences, or his family afterwards. It was too hard.
Yeah, for him it was like a shame to get out to his mother, because he should be the protector for the family.
And you
They get
witnessed
sick
all of
because
this. How did you survive, Omar? Because you just gave few important points about, if you think about your family, you die. Because in your heart, the suffering of just thinking and remembering the people who love you and you love them, it makes it really hard for you to survive these circumstances. Then what is the way to make somebody protect themselves and guard their emotions and their hope for life to survive? What did you do?
I actually started to feel better when everyone I knew died.
Yes, but why? Like, can you explain to me a little bit about that?
Like that you have me or you have a very bad connection, but I guess it's you. So I can't hear you well.
How and why do you think it made you feel a little bit easier about being in this detention center after your whole family, I mean, basically your cousins, you knew that they all died?
When they died, there is no one you should take care of. And someone told me that my family died as well. So there is no one to think about outside the prison. The only thing you think about is yourself, how to take care of your food and of your body. So when my first cousin died, I was for the first time trying to do some exercise in prison, some training. So taking up my arms for the first time and doing like that, just trying to do some training. And I had start to have a faith, I'm gonna survive long time in prison, not outside, get out, but I just gonna survive long time in prison. So I start doing this exercise, and people was looking at me as a stupid guy doing exercise when he's very hungry. You didn't have enough food to do that, and just was continue doing that. And everyone looked at me as stupid for a long time. But after 3 months, all the people in the room was standing up together with me and doing this exercise. But because they could see the smile getting bigger in my face, because I'm doing something to survive. They're not doing anything to survive. They're just sitting down until they die.
Yes.
So people start to see, look, when I was standing up, trying to do something, I could feel better. And everyone wanted to feel better. So people just followed me, and they get like some people around me want to protect me because I did something good. And at that time, I get a task from the guard to write the numbers in the dead bodies. I was in the isolation room, in the morning, just to write a number on every dead body in their head. And that made me stronger, because I move my body. I go to this room and I go inside this room. So I get some movement in my muscles, so I could survive longer time. And at the same time, I get this information about what's happening in prison, why they write numbers in dead bodies, how many dead bodies died in prison, and what they do with these bodies, take them to the hospital 601, and some stuff like that. When you know more, you feel better. So and you start to know more.
So you survived because of you made a decision to fight for it, basically protecting yourself, preserving your body, and you gave and inspired others with you in your same cell who started exercising and doing what you did. May I ask you, Omar,
Yeah,
how many of these people survived?
not so many. People survived in a short term, like when you do something good, you some exercise, people feel optimistic and maybe they're gonna survive. But then when any like Christmas come or Fitr come, people just feel that they're gonna something good gonna happen. Then the Christmas is over, nothing happened. People feel very helpless and they die.
And they died
So
just
not
out
many
of
people.
depression and torture and lack of
Yeah.
nutrition and
Yeah, and the thing is, like, why a lot of people think, why should I still alive in this life of torture every day? I'm not gonna get out of prison. I'm gonna be in this life with torture every day, and no one outside the prison care about us. The Syrians don't care, the Americans don't care, and the European, no one care about us. If anyone care, we're not gonna be here anymore. But no one care. They know, and that made people very helpless.
Omar,
And
when you got out, also you learned, and you told me also that you learned during your time in the detention centers that your own father and your own brothers were also killed in a massacre by the Assad regime in the Beida, which is one of the most famous massacres, infamous massacres against civilians in that area. I want to ask you, after you got out, what was your mission? What did you feel that you did all of this? You worked so hard on preserving your own life, on inspiring others, and now you're free. What was and still is your mission or your purpose, knowing what is happening and continue to happen in Syria?
yeah, I think it feels I have more responsibility to do things more than what I had in prison. When I get out of prison, I was surprised how bad the world was. Um, Everyone is just fighting against like each other, and no one care about what's happening there, and no one know like exactly what's happening in prisons. The only good thing was happening like the Caesar pictures getting out, and people like saw some pictures about what's happening in Syria and Syrian prisons, but nothing more, nothing more. And the media is active about that for month, 2 month, 3 month. Then everyone sleep. No one, when you watch the TV, you see something about Syria, you just flip the channel to someone else, something else like sport. And I think today I have a task, an important task, to educate people to to give speech, educate, or how would call it. To A lot of people say we're not tell them because we don't know where to start.
My last question, Omar, is now, I mean, you speak great English. You live in Sweden. You were in the United States just recently, also educating people about what's happening in Syria. That's very important. You went on CNN and other networks and talked about it in the Congress. Tell me more about what you're doing now, and what do you feel about the hope, the glimpse of hope that there will be accountability in Syria against these people who committed mass murder in detention centers, obviously with every weapon that we've heard of in history was used against civilians, including torture and killing detainees in Syrian prisons.
Yeah, well, I have a normal work. I'm working at a management consulting firm, but at the same time, I'm lecturing around, traveling around the world, like Nordics and the US, some countries to tell people what's happening here and there, so people can help, they can find a way to help other people. Then we have some legal work, so we have start cases, like just case against like 20, like in Sweden, we started a case against 25 like officers who was ordering soldiers to torture people in prisons. And we're trying to do as much as possible as against the government, even if it's like the result's going to be in the long term, like caught in the future, maybe in 10 years or later than that, but we still need to do something. And the most important thing is just to get people to want to do something, because governments don't care. Like, governments don't care. They just care about their economic interest or politics. So they don't care much. We need people to care more, because me and my friends and their friends, we could be millions of people. When we're together, we just have the same goal. We're gonna reach this goal. So
So
that's what
your
I'm doing.
belief is in the people. That's what you're
Yeah,
trying
it
to
is.
influence.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I want to thank you so much. I know you're out of time today, Omar. Your story is inspiring, is very important to be told to the world, and I'm so happy to speak with you today, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
For the second part of this episode, we'll be discussing the United States Holocaust Museum's work on shedding light on the human suffering in Syria, the experiences of the detainees held by the Assad regime, and the upcoming award to be presented by the Holocaust Museum to the White Helmets. Joining us to talk more about this is Naomi Kikoler, Acting Director of the Simon-Skiodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide. Thank you so much, Naomi, for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start by talking about, obviously, the Holocaust Museum has been leading in and covering continuously the Syrian tragedy throughout the years. And now we just learned also that you guys are going to be awarding and giving the Hayvi Bouzo Award to the White Helmets. Tell us a little bit more about the award itself, and then, in relations to why the White Helmets.
So I think for us, right now we are entering the 9th year of atrocities being perpetrated in Syria. And what has really stood out to us as being truly remarkable is the heroic efforts that the Syrian people themselves have taken to try to protect those who are under assault and to try to provide the life-saving services, especially in the absence of the international community doing that. And the White Helmets for us are an example and a testament to just the courage of the Syrian people and of a real commitment to preserving human dignity, the fact that people will put their own lives at risk to run into buildings that have just been bombed, the fact that in doing so they are shedding light and telling the story of what is happening in Syria, in areas that are still being bombarded by the regime, we think is an example of truly heroic efforts. And we want to commend them by honoring them with our highest award. They are getting that award along with a couple, Serge and Betty Klarsfeld, who dedicated their lives to trying to get the evidence, preserve the evidence that shows what happened during the Holocaust. They also put a spotlight on the horrors of what man can do to others. And I think that the White Helmets and the Klarsfelds, though they are separated by 70 years, both showed the type of commitment to protecting humanity that we as an institution want to celebrate and acknowledge.
I mean, it's just very interesting, and I'm sure you can understand that, Naomi. You've met many Syrian refugees, and then you know the situation in the Middle East, the tension between Arabs and Israel. Obviously, there's a war. And then we see right now in the United States, like you just specified, how there are people who deny what is happening in the context of the Holocaust, in the context of what's happening in Syria today. Like one of the nominees for president, we have Tulsi Gabbard, and then we have Ilhan Omar, for example, who's also being accused of inciting anti-Semitism in general. Isn't it a shocker that we see that kind of collaboration when the Holocaust Museum is shedding light on the Syrian refugees? When we look at what's happening in the region, were people surprised when you guys were always reaching out and talking and showing the world what's happening to the people in Syria. Was that also like a paradoxical situation today?
You know what? I think one of the truly remarkable things, and the things that I think is very fortunate, is that when people come to these issues from a place of shared understanding and humanity, it isn't surprising. People are people, irrespective of what they happen to be born or how they're perceived. And anyone who's the victim of a type of crime that we've seen unfold in Syria, or be it in Burma or South Sudan or the Holocaust, is entitled to the same type of attention, focus, and solidarity. And, I would say the answer is, are there people who are surprised? Probably. I think people are heartened to see it. I think people are heartened to see that we can rise above and build communities. I see myself as standing in solidarity with my Syrian friends, irrespective of what their religious beliefs are or political ideologies. I'm not even an American. So, this is one of the positives that has come out of this work, is just, again, a reinforcement of shared values and shared commitments to trying to make sure that human rights are advanced, that people are allowed to live their lives freely. We had a remarkable experience when we had, a few years ago, the former chief rabbi of Damascus come to Washington, D.C. and share the stage with a young Syrian man who helped to rescue Judaica from a synagogue in Damascus. And I think there were people surprised to see.
The rabbi, where does he reside today?
Currently lives in Israel. And it was interesting just to see. I think people sometimes forget that these are communities, and ancient communities, that have lived alongside each other for a very long time, and share a common love and affection for their country of birth. And I think it was one contribution that hopefully we made to just trying to remind people again of those common bonds that bind us all. So are people surprised? I would hope that they're not surprised, because we bleed the same way and we breathe air the same way, and we should stand in solidarity irrespective of what community and community's history you're standing with. It's a privilege to be able to work to help put a spotlight on the experience of those who tragically were murdered and killed during the Holocaust, and those who've survived, just as it is a privilege to be able to try to give voice to those in Syria today who face a daily risk as well.
I do want to talk about Omar Alshogre, who was recently in Washington, D.C., who we had just now earlier on the show. He met also with people from the Holocaust Museum. He spoke out. His story is just devastating to even listen to. We do have so many cases like Omar, and some who are less privileged, who never made it out. But his voice is definitely very significant in terms of more evidence collected against the Assad regime. You guys have showcased Mansour Omari's class, obviously the Caesar's photo. Do you think that with having all these evidence, with collecting, and now we have Omar as well, is that enough to bring the world to hopefully do something? And then obviously the American administration, I mean, what could we wish for at this point, in your opinion, knowing all of this information that we have? And the Assad regime is there's nothing going on right now that threatens Assad anymore.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question on, I think, that notion of how do you actually mobilize the political will to have governments, the United Nations, regional organizations act, is a very difficult one, and one that those of us who work on these issues grapple with on a daily basis. We saw last year a genocide unfold in Burma against the Rohingya, and
which is you're also working on,
yes,
right? At the Holocaust Museum.
So a small kind of ethnic religious minority that lives in Burma, and we now know there's 1.2 million Rohingya that are living in neighboring Bangladesh because they have been pushed out of their country of birth over the last decade. And, you know, we saw one of the quickest mass movements of populations take place over a year ago there. And, you know, the response from the international community was statements of concern, but not much else. In the context of Syria, it's really troubling because we do have, you know, second to the Holocaust, probably the most evidence that would actually be able to be brought before courts than we've ever had before. And it's heartening to see that, especially in Germany, there may potentially be some additional cases that will go forward, and that gives some hope. But it's hard because if I was sitting in Omar's shoes or in Mansour's shoes, to have to continue to tell their story and continue to have policymakers say words of consolation must be incredibly difficult, because what we're looking for is actually action. And we have, along with so many incredible organizations led primarily by Syrian organizations, been trying to tell stories in different ways. One of the challenges is that we know from the experience of the Holocaust, it's hard for people to think about 6 million people who were murdered simply because they were Jewish. In the context of Syria, it's hard for people to think about 500,000 people. It's hard for them to think about over 100,000 people detained and tortured. So we try to find individual stories to help put a human face. And it has helped in some ways. It's helped to get more humanitarian assistance. It's helped to create avenues for justice and accountability. But unfortunately, we still haven't seen truly decisive steps in a concerted and consistent way that would actually stop the killings and prevent future killings. And why that's so difficult is, I think for many people today, they think the conflict is over. They think the atrocities have ended. And we remain as concerned today as we were a year ago that we might still see the worst yet to come. So we're going to continue to try to do everything that we can. But I will say, you know, the response and lack thereof has been incredibly difficult to kind of comprehend.
You know, I've had, it was a former prosecutor, his name is David Crane, who is working on the Syria Accountability Project. He founded it. And he said that simply there's no political will. What does that translate to? I mean, what does that mean? How can we get that political will?
You know, the lack of political will has been there, unfortunately, from the outset. I think that what was really frustrating and humbling was even in the first few months, if we go back kind of 9 years ago, there were always other issues that governments were going to prioritize or would bring forward. You know, I remember meetings very early on with UN Security Council members, and we would be talking about Syria and they would invoke Libya. We would talk about Syria and they would invoke another crisis situation. For whatever reason, we have a hard time being able to address multiple crises at the same time. And I think we also have a hard time understanding that you can hope for the best, but you need to plan for the worst often. And for all of those who years ago thought Assad as a reformer would not turn his own guns on his own people, those assumptions have proven so fatally wrong. And what are the lessons today when we talk about how do we mobilize political will? It has to be first and foremost, check every single assumption you have and plan for the worst. Act in accordance for the worst. And if you get the best and your hopes prove true, then that's wonderful. But that can't be the orientation from the outset. And again, as I said, this case kind of confounds all of us who've been working on these types of issues because of just the fact that you can't say you did not know. There are few people on earth who can say they're not aware of what's been happening in Syria.
You know, today we saw some comments, which, you know, might be true, might not be true, but they were troubling, that as we know, there are some American citizens who are imprisoned in Syria. And the comments were that if the United States, that this administration is saying to the Assad regime, if they do let those people go, that there will be some normalization of relationship with the Assad regime, or there will be some basically room there to negotiate. Do you support this type of approach in terms of the Assad regime, knowing that there are hundreds of thousands who we don't know anything about? I mean, obviously we care about the American citizens because we are Americans, but what do you think of that notion?
You know, I can't speak to what the U.S. government has said. I didn't hear those reports, so I can't go into depth in that regard. I would raise a couple of things that I think would be important for policymakers to think about in a situation like this. We know currently that there are about 3 million civilians in Idlib who are facing daily bombardment right now. 90 people were killed in the month of March, half of them were children. We know that there are still tens of thousands of people who are in regime prisons. We know that in government-controlled areas, areas that have been taken over by the regime again, people are being taken into detention and disappearing again. We know that there has been efforts to forcibly conscript people into the military. We know that this is a regime that has used torture to control the population, not just in the last 9 years, but over previous decades, be it the current president or his father. There's nothing to suggest that these practices are going to change in the future. So in terms of the commission of atrocities, this is an ongoing situation. So any discussion of normalization sounds a little bit premature when you have someone perpetrating atrocities on this scale. And when the call for justice is so high from those who have survived and those who have had to flee and been displaced, it's hard to reconcile how you're going to create an environment where people are going to feel safe and comfortable returning home in the absence of any form of justice. So we know that often countries that experience, I don't want to say relapses, but cycles of atrocities are countries that have not come to terms with their own history, have not held perpetrators accountable, have not ensured that the needs of those who have been victimized have been met, that displaced are allowed to return back to their homes, which is another issue that is very live today. So I think it is challenging to think about it just as a practitioner on these types of issues to see how you build a society that is able to move forward without future tensions if we today, as you suggest, kind of see a normalization of relations. It's obviously a very difficult and nuanced conversation, but I do think it's worth heeding the lessons of what has happened in past cases.
That was really articulate. I really want to thank you, Naomi. I mean, this is an ongoing discussion. I would love to be covering your upcoming award giving to the White Helmets, and we will always be interested in learning about what you're doing with your activities, and very happy and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, and we very much appreciate your ongoing attention on this and on the work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. That was it for tonight's episode. Thank you for watching. Good night.